Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today I thought it would be good to have a little catch up on what's going on in the Warhammer 40K universe. Just what is the current state of the Imperium? Obviously I'm going to be mentioning events from across the novels here, so just keep that in mind as we move forward. However, with that said, let's waste no time and just jump straight in. Okay, so we know ever since Cadia fell, the Warhammer 40k universe has seen a period of change like never before. The galaxy being ripped into two, and Primarchs returning to bestride the stars. However, things have been ominously quiet since Lion L. Johnson returned to the galaxy. The mainline installments of the Dawn of Fire series really just filling in the gaps of the Indomitus Crusade gone by. And so today, I wanted to just recap what we know about the most recent events and how things stand as we await the next big installment moving us forward. So, we know with the fall of Cadia, Abaddon achieved his long worked for victory of breaking the traitor legions out of their imprisonment within the Eye of Terror, with the resulting flood of the warp literally splitting the galaxy and the Imperium in half, becoming known as the Great Rift, or officially the Cicatrix Maledictum. This enabled the boundary between the material galaxy and the immaterial to become weaker and closer than ever, allowing demons to appear like never before, and chaos was ascendant everywhere. The southern half of the Imperium was known as Imperium Sanctus, and though it was in absolute carnage and turmoil, it still benefited from the Emperor's Astronomicon, after its strange temporary ceasing at least, meaning they could at least tell where in the galaxy they were and still communicate with each other, not to mention benefiting from the Emperor's power, calming their worst fears, an unknown and unspoken benefit that the Astronomicon has always provided. Whereas across the rift, within the northern half of the Imperium, now known as Imperium Nihilus, or the Dark Imperium, they had nothing. With the Great Rift blocking the Emperor's light, the situation there was even worse, with every world left to fend for itself, with astropathic communication a virtual impossibility. Warp travel is reduced to short jumps and blind luck, with pretty much guaranteed demonic assault each time. And it was and is quite literally at the mercy of the Pantheon. And of course it was in the aftermath of this cataclysmic event that Roboute Guilliman was revived by the combined efforts of Belisarius Cawl and the Eldari, promptly sorting out the situation within Ultramar before crusading to the throne world and reuniting with the Emperor within the throne room. After communing with the Emperor, Guilliman immediately declared himself Lord Commander and Imperial Regent of the entire Imperium, assuming de facto control in the Emperor's name. And the events of this period upon the throne world are seen within the novel The Emperor's Legion, part of the Watchers in the Throne series, as well as its sequel The Regent's Shadow, which shows the High Lord's attempted rebellion against the returned Guilliman, and how the Primarch put it down. Guilliman would announce the Indomitus Crusade to drive back chaos, as well as revealing Belisarius Cawl's secret 10,000-year project of the Primaris Marines, the improvement over the Emperor's original Space Marine design. And although it is the current mainline narrative series of novels, the Dawn of Fire series is actually flushing out the events of this early Indomitus Crusade, showing us a little more in depth what actually happened. even though timeline-wise it has already transpired, with us knowing that this first stage of Guilliman's grand plan was successful. Imperium Sanctus was stabilised and brought back from the apocalyptic situation it was in. And this is where we need to be clear, because the entire galaxy, both halves of the Imperium, are still very much locked in eternal war. Neither half of them are in a good situation by any stretch of the imagination. Even Sanctus is in a much worse situation now than it was prior to Cadia's fall. However, the Sanctus half is now much more stable at least, thanks to the Indomitus Crusade. Guilliman's grand offensive enabling Imperium Sanctus to get some much needed breath back into its lungs, so to speak, relieving the pressure of the Chaos Assault in much needed areas. Now, it's a bit vague on quite when and where Guilliman made it across the rift and reached the Blood Angels' homeworld of Baal, saving the chapter and their successors against Leviathan, where he then appointed Dante Warden of the entire Imperium Nihilus, because GW did a big time shift, greatly reducing the span of time post Guilliman's return from what it originally was, even re-releasing a slightly changed Dark Imperium trilogy. However, at some point in the Crusade, Guilliman does do that. And the biggest stable route across the rift, the Nachmund Gauntlet, is found, with the Imperium then committing a huge amount of resources to it, resulting in an eternal war with Chaos for its control, pretty much making the Nachmund Gauntlet the new Cadia in a lot of ways, the most important battlefield within the entire galaxy by far. However, the end of the Indomitus Crusade was covered within the Dark Imperium trilogy, showing us that Guilliman, despite saving Imperium Sanctus, was feeling extreme political pressure from the various Imperial power bases, who were extremely apprehensive about a Primarch returned and leading such a vast force of Astartes, essentially a de facto legion in all but name. And that may sound a little odd, but we need to remember by the time of the current Imperium, all that's generally remembered of the past is that the Primarchs and their legions were responsible for the heresy, and it was they who almost destroyed the entire empire. And so even Guilliman, the known saviour during the years of the Scouring, still faces a huge amount of skepticism and fear. And so Guilliman, declaring the first stage of Indomitus successful, dispersed the remaining Primaris, his unnumbered sons, across the Imperium to existing chapters and to form new ones. And he returned to Ultramar with his own sons to save it from the traitor Mortarian's invasion. And there's a few points of note to make of things that transpired during this time. First, Guilliman revealed to his senior military commanders that he has been cooperating with the Eldari, having an emissary of Eldrad Allfrans present upon his flagship, which didn't go down particularly well, even with Guilliman making a clear public declaration of destroying their species if they tested him. Privately, however, Guilliman appeared to be far more accommodating, having the emissary within his closest council of advisors. Secondly, Guilliman's been struggling greatly to come to terms with the Imperium's new faith, the worship of the Emperor as a god. The ecclesiarchy being too entrenched and powerful within the Imperium to do anything about it, he was forced to remain silent publicly, but privately despised them. However, after several encounters with eruptions of the Emperor's power, arising saints, Guilliman would ultimately be saved by what appeared to be the Emperor himself during his battle with Mortarion, saving Guilliman from death before banishing Mortarion and burning a portion of the Garden of Nurgle, leaving Guilliman to end the Dark Imperium series by genuinely questioning if his father is now truly a god, and if there was a way to return him to life, free of the Golden Throne. Thirdly, Guilliman is clearly completely unaware that the Emperor split off his remaining humanity before his confrontation with Horus, and so he's clearly pretty disappointed and upset by his reunion within the throne room, not receiving any form of compassion as he'd hoped from his father. So he's kind of disregarded the Emperor as his father, despite remaining loyal to him and humanity. Although it is pointed out he remembers the reunion differently every time he thinks about it. And Trajan Valoris, the only other being present within the throne room, told Guilliman he saw him conversing with the Emperor in deep conversation, not what Guilliman remembers at all. And lastly, though he wasn't present, we begin to see Guilliman's frustration and mistrust of Belisarius Cawl, who at the best of times was impossible for Guilliman to get a hold of, and at worst was flat out ignoring the Primarch's messages and summons. There is also the slight problem that Cawl appears to have installed what's clearly an artificial intelligence device within Guilliman's flagship, which enables Guilliman to benefit from Cawl's intelligence when he's not present himself. However, so it was, the Dark Imperium trilogy ended with Ultramar saved, the first stage of Indomitus Crusade now complete, and with Imperium Sanctus now far more stable, with Guilliman intending to launch his next stage across the Great Rift as soon as he could. And from here, there hasn't been a great deal of movement, as the Dawn of Fire series came along, which is really filling in the details of the Indomitus Crusade gone by. However, aside from a storyline of the Inquisition and Chaos fighting each other to find what appears to be a return of the Starchild theory, we got a little development of seeing another major crossing of the Great Rift being found, which was dubbed the Attilam Gate. And I call this the DS9 of 40k, because if you ever watched that Star Trek show, which was arguably the best one by the way, at least rivaling Next Generation, this crossing appears to open and close with the tides of the Great Rift, so it's not quite as stable as the Nachmund Gauntlet. However, it certainly appears to be the point that Guilliman can launch his next stage of Indomitus from, a real invasion of Imperium Nihilus. Now, the next big development was that we got the return of Lionel Johnson to the galaxy, within the novel The Lion, Son of the Forest, who would awaken and return unknown and alone across the Great Rift within the madness of Imperium Nihilus. Encountering one of his fallen sons, El Johnson would discover the truth of Caliban's fall, that not all of his sons present upon the world knew of Luther's betrayal, and indeed they were only fighting back out of self-defense, believing El Johnson the one who had betrayed them, and thus the Primarch vowed to give the chance of redemption to all of those so-called fallen who had never truly allied with the ruinous powers, who had never knowingly betrayed the Imperium. Cut off from the throne world, unable to visit his father as he wished, unaware even if the Imperium still existed beyond the Great Rift. The Lion decided to do what he did best in the ages past of Old Caliban: defend the people against the monsters in the dark. And so that's what he did, attacking and destroying any chaos forces he found, gradually building a following of loyal mortals, until eventually rumours of this Knight of Nihilus reached Dante, and Dante would travel to find the source of the rumour. Immediately recognising L. Johnson for what he was, he informed him that Roboute Guilliman still lived and had returned to the galaxy also, leading a crusade to save the Imperium. However, before L. Johnson could do anything about it, he would first reunite with his modern-era sons, the Unforgiven, finding the massed Unforgiven assembled within the Somnium Stars, embattled against the forces of chaos. Thanks to the actions of the demon Vashtor the Archiphane, a corrupted version of Caliban had been rebirthed, named Wormwood, whereupon Supreme Grandmaster Azrael was fighting with the demon Primarch Angron. L. Johnson would jump into the fray to save his sons, and would slay and banish Angron, before retreating with all the Imperial forces, as Wormwood tore a hole in reality and promptly disappeared. And this is where L. Johnson's story currently ends, reunited with his chapter and successors, leading them within Imperium Nihilus, as far as we know, given the limited information within their codex. As for the planet of Wormwood, this was the latest action of Abaddon the Despoiler, allied with Vashtor. Wormwood supposedly being an assembled key to unlock a mysterious vault of the Old Ones, containing a weapon of untold power, which as of now they are still searching for. It's an uneasy alliance between the two, but one Abaddon is content to go along with for now, and one that Vashtor is hoping will be able to elevate him to the status of a fifth god of chaos, joining the Pantheon. Abaddon has also renewed his attack upon the Nachmund Gauntlet, greatly increasing the pressure upon the beleaguered defenders there. And so this brings us to the novel Genefather, Belisarius Cawl's latest instalment, and really the latest novel in what I would class as the mainline narrative. Here, as Belisarius is concocting ever more extreme actions to rebuild his own version of the Necron pylon system, he receives a message from Roboute Guilliman, in which Guilliman explicitly states he is on the very eve of his departure from Imperium Sanctus, meaning he is launching his next crusade. With that in mind, Guilliman admits knowing that ordering Cawl to come with him is a waste of time, but he insists that Cawl send his most suitable and trusted servant to follow him across the rift, to help in spreading the Primaris technology to the chapters over there. Because as Guilliman was forced to disband his legions of Primaris due to that political pressure, he simply doesn't have the numbers to be able to reinforce the Space Marine chapters within Nihilus that are still surviving. Which I quote, "Therefore I request that you dispatch one of your most trusted servants to Imperium Nihilus in your stead. The status of most Space Marine chapters on the far side of the rift is unknown. The unnumbered suns are largely disbanded. I run out of your Primaris Marines to give Cawl. I require an expert to bring the chapters in Nihilus back up to full strength as quickly as possible. Standard torchbearer fleets will not suffice alone. Make more Primaris Marines. Send me a Genitor of Genius. I care not to the methods, only for the result." With a little good fortune, your servant will be in time to join me before crossing the rift. If not, they must follow with all due haste. I stress with full intention, Archmagos, that this is an order given with the full authority of my position, and of the Emperor himself. So, the reconquest of Nihilus was already going to be an uphill struggle, given the situation and lack of the Emperor's Astronomicon, but it's clearly going to be even harder, with not being able to instantly restore and replenish the desperate chapters over there to full fighting strength. But at least it's finally begun. And the fact that it has begun is further reinforced by the fact that we've had the full might of Hive Fleet Leviathan emerge on the western edge of the galaxy. And it's the High Lords of Terror who are having to deal with the problem, with Guilliman nowhere to be seen, because he is quite clearly busy elsewhere, aka across the Great Rift. And so, this is exactly where we currently stand. L. Johnson is back and in charge of the Unforgiven, somewhere within Imperium Nihilus. Dante is continuing his efforts to build Baal into a throne world of the North, so to speak, a hub in which Nihilus can look to for salvation. And Guilliman has now crossed the rift, beginning his reconquest of Imperium Nihilus, though we have yet to see it. We know there is one final installment of the Dawn of Fire series left to come, which will most likely have some big reveal regarding the Starchild narrative. But then surely it'll be on to finally seeing Guilliman's crossing of the rift, and the real next chapter of what's going on within the galaxy. Guilliman learning of L. Johnson's return, and building to that most anticipated reunion between the brothers. Because considering how long ago L. Johnson returned to the galaxy now, it is surely time we got to see the brothers reunited. And as always everyone, what do you think? A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow, and if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.